My family forgot my birthday, not a late text, not a missed call they apologized for an hour later. They simply did not come. I had just landed at JFK after 11 days in London. It was 6:47 in the morning. I was 32 years old that day, and I stood at the arrivals curb with one suitcase and a phone that had not buzzed once since touchdown. I did not call anyone a second time. I did not cry. I stood there and I waited, not for them, but for the black SUV that turned the corner exactly when I needed it to. What my family did not know was that the same morning they forgot me at the airport, the man stepping out of that car had driven me to meetings with some of the most powerful executives in the country. You will not believe what happened the next time my brother tried to use my name to open a door. Before I continue, tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been overlooked by the people who were supposed to show up for you. There is a particular kind of invisible that has nothing to do with being unseen. I grew up in a house in Greenwich, Connecticut with 4 bedrooms, a circular driveway, and a mother who kept fresh flowers in the entryway every single week without fail. From the outside, the Morgan family looked exactly the way my mother intended. Pressed clothes at church, matching luggage at the airport, a Christmas card photo every December with everyone smiling in coordinated navy and cream. What the photo never showed was the seating arrangement at the dinner table. My brother Colton always sat to my mother Diane's right. That was the seat closest to the window, the one with the best light, the one where she could reach over and touch his arm when she laughed. I sat across from him, not at the far end, just across. But in our family, that distance was a continent. Colton was 4 years older than me and had the kind of confidence that came not from earning anything but from never once being told no. He played lacrosse at UConn, graduated with a business degree he used mostly to talk at dinner parties, and married Renee Calloway in a ceremony at her parents' estate in Westport when he was 29. My mother cried through the whole reception. I was a bridesmaid. Nobody asked me to give a toast. I did not resent Colton for being loved. I want to be clear about that. What I resented, if I am honest, was the arithmetic of it. The way our family operated as though attention were a fixed resource. And most of it had already been allocated before I was old enough to ask for any. By the time I was in high school, I had learned to solve my own problems. Not out of independence, not out of some admirable self-sufficiency I can brag about now. Out of necessity. If my laptop broke, I fixed it. If I needed a ride, I arranged one. If I had a question about college applications, I called the guidance counselor myself because my mother was driving Colton to a recruiting visit and my father, who left when I was 11, was not a resource anyone consulted for anything anymore. I went to NYU on a partial scholarship and a lot of student loans I did not tell my mother the full amount of. I studied economics and stayed in the city after graduation because the city made sense to me in a way that Greenwich never had. In the city, nobody assumed anything about you. Nobody handed you anything either, but at least the playing field was legible. I started Lumen Advisory Group 4 days after my 26th birthday in a sublease office in Midtown that smelled like old carpet and someone else's ambition. The name came from the Latin word for light, specifically the unit of light that measures how much actually reaches a surface rather than how much is emitted. I had read about it in a physics article at 2 in the morning and thought that is the only metric that matters. Not how much you put out, how much lands. The first 2 years were the kind of difficult that does not make for a good story at a dinner party. Cold emails that went nowhere. A client who hired us got cold feet and pulled the contract 3 days before the kickoff meeting. A business partner who left in month 7 and took 2 contacts with her. I ate a lot of lunches at my desk and a lot of dinners standing over my kitchen sink. I did not tell my family any of this, not because I was ashamed, because they did not ask. When I came home for Thanksgiving that first year, my mother asked if I was still doing the consulting thing. I said yes. She nodded and turned back to the stove. Colton asked if I was seeing anyone. I said not really. Renee, newly pregnant and glowing in a cashmere sweater, said, "You should really try the apps, Alexis. A lot of people meet that way now." I smiled and poured myself more wine. By the time Lumen crossed 8 figures in revenue, I had stopped expecting the question. The work was the work. The clients knew who I was. My team of 22 knew what we had built. Marcus, who had driven me to my first major pitch in a car service sedan and later became my full-time driver, knew the hours I kept and never once commented on them. That was enough. That had always been enough. What my family knew about my professional life could be summarized in a single sentence. Alexis does something in consulting in the city. They knew the name of my company the way you know the name of a restaurant you have never been to. It was a fact that existed, unexamined, in some corner of the family's collective awareness, never retrieved, never considered. I had never corrected that impression. I want you to understand something about that choice, because it matters for everything that comes later. I did not hide Lumen to be strategic. I did not construct a secret to deploy at the right moment. I simply stopped offering information to people who had never once leaned forward to receive it. There is a difference. One is a plan. The other is just exhaustion that eventually learns to look like composure. On the morning of my 32nd birthday, I boarded a flight home from Heathrow after 11 days, closing a deal I had spent 4 months building. I was tired in the specific way that only real work produces, the kind of tired that sits behind your eyes and in your shoulders, and feels, if you let it, almost like satisfaction. I opened the family group chat somewhere over the Atlantic. Nobody had written anything since Colton posted a photo of his new golf club 6 days earlier. I put my phone in my bag and watched the clouds for a while. I told myself it was fine, and it almost was. The flight landed at 6:31 in the morning, 16 minutes ahead of schedule. I cleared customs in under 20 minutes. I have global entry, have had it for 4 years. One of the small practical upgrades I made to my life without announcing it to anyone. The customs officer glanced at my passport, looked at the screen, handed it back. I thanked him and wheeled my suitcase toward the exit doors. Terminal 4 at JFK at 6:47 in the morning has a specific quality of light, pale and flat, coming through the tall windows at a low angle, the kind of light that makes everyone look like they slept on a plane. Families clustered near the arrivals doors, some holding signs, some just holding each other. A man in a gray coat lifted a little girl onto his shoulders. Two women ran toward each other from opposite ends of the corridor and collided in the middle, laughing. I watched all of this the way you watch weather through a window. Present but not inside it, I pulled out my phone as the exit doors slid open and the cold March air hit my face. 7 missed notifications. 3 were emails from my assistant Sarah. 1 was a news alert I had set for a client's industry. 1 was a promotional offer from a hotel chain. 1 was a calendar reminder for a call I had at 9. 1 was a text from my mother, sent at 11:58 the previous night. Safe travels, honey, see you tomorrow. Nothing this morning. I opened the group chat. Colton had not posted since the golf clubs. Renee had reacted to that post with a heart emoji 4 days ago. My mother had added a thumbs up. The last message directed at me personally in that thread was from 3 weeks prior, when Diane had forwarded a coupon for a meal delivery service with the caption, "Thought this might be helpful since you're always so busy." I stood at the edge of the curb in the arrivals lane and looked at the line of cars moving slowly past. Yellow cabs, a hotel shuttle, a black town car collecting a man in a suit who had someone waiting with his name on a sign, a minivan with a family tumbling out of it, all of them talking at once. I called my mother. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was warm and unhurried, the voice she used for people she wanted to impress. I hung up without leaving a message. I called Colton. It rang 6 times. He picked up on the 7th, which surprised me. "Hey." His voice was thick. "Still asleep, I just landed," I said. A pause. The sound of sheets. "Oh, right. How was London?" "Fine. Are you coming?" Another pause, longer this time. I heard Renee's voice in the background, indistinct. Then Colton. "Coming where?" I did not answer that immediately. I stood on the curb and let the question sit in the air between us. Across however many miles of cell signal separated my spot at JFK from his bedroom in Darien. "To the airport," I said. "We talked about this 3 weeks ago. You said you and Mom would come, Alexis." His tone shifted. Not unkind, exactly, but with that particular texture of someone who has decided they are not at fault for something. That was like a tentative thing. "I didn't know your exact flight, and it's early." "It's my birthday, Colton." Silence. "Happy birthday," he said. And then, "Sorry, it's been a really busy week." Renee has her thing with the kids and Mom's been dealing with the Hendersons' dinner party drama. You know how she gets. "We'll do something soon, okay? Maybe this weekend." I looked at a family 20 feet away from me. A woman in her 60s, white coat, gray hair pulled back, waiting with a hand-lettered sign that says "Welcome home, sweetheart" in red marker. The daughter who walked through the doors and saw it made a sound I could hear from where I was standing. A sound that had no word for it. "Okay," I said. "Get some rest," Colton said. "You sound tired." We hung up. I stood there for another moment. The cold was real, mid-March in New York. The kind of cold that has given up on winter but has not yet agreed to spring. My coat was in my suitcase because I had packed it there in London where it had been 54 degrees, a decision I was now regretting. I did not call my mother again. I did not text the group chat. I did not sit down on the curb and process what I was feeling, which was not quite hurt, and not quite anger, and not quite the numb nothing I would have preferred. It was something smaller and older than any of those. Something I had been carrying so long I sometimes forgot it had a weight. I opened my phone and sent one message. Not to my family, to Marcus. I'm at Curb 2, Arrivals, Terminal 4. His response came in 40 seconds. 4 minutes out, I put my phone in my coat pocket, my blazer pocket, because my coat was in my suitcase and the cold was real, and I waited. I watched the cars. I watched the family with the handmade sign climb into a station wagon, together, all of them talking. The mother reaching back to squeeze her daughter's hand across the center console. The black SUV turned the corner at exactly 4 minutes. Marcus pulled up to the curb and had the door open before I reached him. He was 51 years old, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and a posture that came from 20 years of doing a job he took seriously. He did not say happy birthday. He had learned, over 4 years of working together, exactly when to speak and when not to. He took my suitcase. I got in. The door closed. The car was warm. It smelled like the pine air freshener. Marcus kept clipped to the vent and the coffee he had brought. A cup from the place on Lexington I had mentioned once, 8 months ago, that I liked. It was sitting in the cup holder on my side, exactly the right size. Still hot, I picked it up, held it with both hands. I did not say anything for a long time. Marcus drove. The airport receded behind us. The highway opened up, gray and wide in the early morning light, and New York came into view the way it always did from this approach. Sudden and total, the skyline appearing all at once as if it had been waiting. Good flight? Marcus asked. He asked every time. It was not small talk. It was the way he checked in without making me account for anything I did not want to account for. Long? I said. He nodded. We did not speak again until we reached the bridge. I turned 32 years old in the back of a black SUV on the way home from an airport where nobody had come to meet me. The coffee was hot. The city was right there. And something that had been soft in me for a very long time was quietly, without drama, becoming something else. The penthouse was on East 74th Street, 14th floor, with windows that faced south and west, and caught the afternoon light in a way that still surprised me, sometimes even after 3 years of living there. I had not told my family I owned it. They knew I lived, somewhere on the Upper East Side. Because I had mentioned the neighborhood once at Christmas, and Diane had said, "Oh, how fun, are you renting with roommates?" And I had said no, I have my own place. And she had moved on to asking Colton about his kitchen renovation before I finished the sentence. So that was the extent of what they knew, somewhere on the Upper East Side. Presumably a one-bedroom, presumably rented. The reality was 2,400 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a study I used more than either, and a kitchen I had designed with a contractor over 6 months because I cared about the counter height and the light over the sink and the way the cabinet pulls felt in my hand. And I had learned by then that caring about things you have built with your own money is one of the quiet rights of a life constructed entirely by yourself. Marcus dropped me at the entrance at 7:23 in the morning. I thanked him. He said he would be available at noon if I needed anything. I said I would text him. I went upstairs, unpacked my suitcase with the focused efficiency of someone who has traveled enough to make it a system rather than a chore, and stood in the shower for 11 minutes. Then I made coffee, real coffee, from the bag of beans I had brought back from a place in Marylebone, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and my phone, and the particular silence of a city morning when everyone else has somewhere to be. It was my birthday. I opened my laptop at 9:14. My mother called. I answered. "Alexis, honey." Her voice was bright in the way it got when she was working from a script she had prepared. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I'm so sorry about this morning. You know how things get." "It's fine, Mom. We'll do dinner this weekend. Maybe Saturday. I'll make the lamb." "Sure, how was London? Did you eat well over there?" "I always worry about you traveling alone." I had been traveling alone since I was 24 years old. I had been to London 11 times. I said. London was great. The trip went well. Good, good. A pause. The sound of her moving through the kitchen, a cabinet opening and closing. "Colton mentioned you seemed upset this morning." I looked at the wall above my kitchen counter. There was a small painting there, an abstract in pale gold and gray, bought from a gallery in Chelsea 3 years ago, the first piece of art I had ever purchased because I wanted it, rather than because it cost a particular amount. I had been looking at it for 3 years, and it still gave me the same quiet thing it gave me the first time. I wasn't upset, I said. Good. Because you know we love you. It was just an early morning and things got away from us. Another pause. Oh, and honey, Colton wanted me to mention. He has a connection he's trying to build with a company called Hartwell Industries. Do you know them? He thought maybe through your work you might have crossed paths. I picked up my coffee cup. Set it down, Hartwell. I said, what kind of connection? A job, I think. Or maybe a consulting thing. I don't know the details. He's been trying to get in front of their people for a few months. You know how competitive these things are. Her voice had the careful warmth of someone asking a favor while pretending not to. He just thought, since you know so many people, maybe you could mention his name somewhere, you know. Put in a word. I thought about the meeting I had sat in 48 hours ago at Hartwell's London office. I thought about David Prescott's handshake and the signed contract sitting in my files. I thought about the $28 million figure that had been initialed on page 47 of that agreement, my initials and David's, into conference rooms overlooking the Thames. I'll see what I can do, I said. My mother exhaled, relieved. You're such a good sister. Alexis, he really needs this, we said goodbye. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after she hung up. Then, at 11:47 that same morning, Colton texted me directly for the first time in 6 weeks. Hey, Mom said she talked to you. Appreciate it. The company is Hartwell Industries. Their CEO is David Prescott. I've been trying to get a meeting with his team for like 3 months. Nobody will call me back. If you have any contacts there, even just an assistant or someone in HR, that would be huge. Don't need you to do much, just like drop my name. Thanks. I read the message twice. Drop my name. I set the phone face down on the table and looked out the window at the city for a while. A water tower on the building across the street. A pigeon on a ledge, very still. A window washer moving along a track 4 floors below me, slow and methodical, doing the work. Here is what I understood in that moment, sitting at my kitchen table on the morning of my 32nd birthday, coffee going cold beside me. My brother wanted me to introduce him to a man whose company had just signed a $28 million agreement with mine. He wanted me to drop my name into a room he was trying to enter. He wanted to use me as a door handle. He did not know he was already inside the house. I did not respond to his text that afternoon. I opened my laptop instead and pulled up the guest list document Sarah had sent me the previous week. The Plaza Hotel. Saturday the 22nd. The Hartwell Foundation Gala. Annual fundraiser, black tie, 300 guests, Hartwell Industries as lead sponsor. I scrolled until I found what I was looking for. There confirmed, with a +1 notation, Colton Morgan. Guest of Renee Morgan, +1, Hartwell partner table, courtesy of James Whitfield. James Whitfield was Colton's college friend. He worked in Hartwell's marketing division. He had gotten Colton a seat at a table at a gala where David Prescott would be in the same room. Colton thought that was his in. I looked at my own name on the list, 3 rows above his. Alexis Morgan, Lumen Advisory Group, presenting sponsor, table 1. I closed the laptop, I went to the window and stood there for a while, looking south toward Midtown, toward the building where my office occupied the entire 31st floor, toward the city I had built a company inside of, without anyone in my family ever once asking how. I did not feel angry. I want to be clear about that too, the same way I was clear about the resentment earlier. What I felt was something more like clarity. The sharp, clean feeling of understanding exactly where you stand and exactly what is about to happen. I picked up my phone and called Sarah. Hey, I said when she answered. For the Plaza Gala on Saturday, make sure my name card reads exactly as follows: Alexis Morgan, founder and CEO, Lumen Advisory Group. I paused, full title. Don't abbreviate anything. Got it, Sarah said. Anything else? Make sure Marcus has the right pickup time, and Sarah, don't respond to any inquiries about our Hartwell relationship between now and Saturday. If anyone calls, just say no comment is available at this time. Understood. I hung up. Looked at the city one more time. Then I went to make a second cup of coffee, because it was still my birthday, and I had a 9 o'clock call to prep for, and the work, as it always had, was waiting. The offices of Lumen Advisory Group occupied the entire 31st floor of a building on 6th Avenue in Midtown, 2 blocks from Bryant Park. I had signed the lease 4 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon in October, In a conference room, 3 floors below where I now sat, with a pen that ran out of ink halfway through and had to be replaced by the building manager, who found the whole situation funnier than I did. The space had been raw then: concrete floors, exposed ductwork, the previous tenant's cable management still stapled along the baseboards. I had stood in the middle of it after everyone else left and turned 360 degrees slowly, the way you do when you are trying to memorize something. Now there were 22 people who came to work here every morning. Real people with real salaries and health insurance and opinions about where to order lunch. People who had built things with me, some of them from the beginning, some of them more recently, all of them part of something that had grown past what I had originally imagined when I signed that lease with the pen that ran out of ink. I came in the Wednesday after my birthday, the morning after I had spent my birthday evening eating takeout sushi alone in my kitchen and watching a documentary about the Faroe Islands, which I had been meaning to do for months and which turned out to be exactly as peaceful as I needed. Sarah had my calendar open on her screen when I arrived. "You have the Hartwell debrief at 10, she said, handing me a coffee that was not from the place on Lexington but from the cart downstairs, which I actually preferred in the morning. Then the Chicago preliminary at 1, and James Okafor from the board wants 15 minutes whenever you have it." "Put James at 4, I said. After the Chicago call, I went to my office, which had windows on 2 sides and a desk I had chosen specifically because it was too large for any reasonable person to justify, and which I justified by filling it entirely every single day. I hung my coat. I sat down. I opened the Hartwell file. The agreement had been 4 months in the making. David Prescott had come to us through a referral from a client in the financial services sector who had described Lumen as the firm that tells you what you don't want to hear and is right every time. David had laughed when he told me that during our first call. I had not laughed because it was accurate and I saw no reason to be modest about accuracy. What Hartwell needed was a complete strategic restructuring of their advisory framework ahead of a major acquisition they were planning in the healthcare sector. It was complex work, the kind that required not just analysis but the ability to hold a client's long-term interests in tension with their short-term instincts, which were almost always in conflict. My team had spent 4 months doing exactly that. The London trip had been the closing meeting. The final review, the final adjustments, the signatures, $28 million over 3 years. The largest single contract in Lumen's history. At 10 o'clock, I walked into the main conference room, where my team lead Thomas and 2 senior analysts were waiting with the debrief materials. We spent 90 minutes going through the implementation timeline, the deliverable schedule, the communication protocols David's team had requested. It was good work. Careful, thorough, the kind of meeting that reminds you why you built the thing you built. At 11:34, as we were wrapping up, Thomas said, "One more thing. David Prescott's office called yesterday afternoon while you were traveling. He wants to confirm your attendance at the Hartwell Foundation Gala on Saturday. Apparently, he'd like to introduce you to a few board members personally." I looked up from the document I was reviewing. "Personally," I repeated. His words, Thomas said. He said, and I'm quoting here, "Make sure Alexis knows I'm counting on her being there." I thought about Colton's text. "Don't need you to do much, just like drop my name." I thought about the Plaza Gala guest list. Table 1, presenting sponsor. 3 rows above my brother's name. "Tell David's office I'll be there," I said. I walked back to my office after the meeting and stood at the window for a moment, looking out at 6th Avenue below, the yellow cabs and the lunch crowds, and the ordinary Tuesday motion of a city that had no idea about any of this. Then I sat down at my desk and pulled up the Hartwell Company directory on my screen. There it was. The organizational chart David had shared with us during due diligence, standard practice for a contract of this scope. Every division, every senior hire, every reporting line. I scrolled to the marketing division. James Whitfield, senior manager, brand partnerships. Hired 18 months ago. Colton's college friend. The man who had gotten my brother a seat at table 7 at a gala where David Prescott would be working the room. I thought about what Colton did not know. Not in a triumphant way. I want to be clear about that, because this story is not about triumph. Not exactly. It is about something quieter than that. It is about what happens when you spend years building something real and silent, and then the world, without any intervention from you, arranges itself into a moment of perfect visibility. Colton did not know that the CEO he had been trying to reach for 3 months had flown to London to close a deal with his sister's firm. He did not know that David Prescott knew my name the way people know the names of people they trust with significant decisions. He did not know that when David said he was counting on me being at that gala, he meant it the way you mean it about someone whose presence changes the texture of a room. He did not know any of this because he had never asked. Not once. Not about my work, not about my clients, not about what Lumen Advisory Group actually did or how large it had become or what it had cost me to build it. In 4 years of Lumen existing, my brother had asked me about my company exactly as many times as my mother had asked me about my apartment, Zell. I pulled up a blank document and typed a single line, something I did sometimes when I needed to organize my thinking before a significant moment. What does the room look like before the lights come on? I stared at it for a while. Then I closed the document without saving it, because I already knew the answer. The room looked exactly like this, like normal, like nothing had changed and nothing was about to. That was always how it looked. I picked up my phone and opened Colton's unanswered text. I had not responded in 2 days. I typed a reply now, short and precise. The way I wrote everything, "I'll see you Saturday." I sent it and put the phone down. He responded in 4 minutes. "Wait, are you going to the Hartwell Gala? How? Do you know someone?" I did not answer that one. I had a Chicago call to prepare for, and the work was still waiting, and Saturday was 4 days away, and some things, the best things, the things that have been building for years, are better received than explained. Colton called me Thursday morning at 8:22, which meant he had been awake for at least an hour thinking about it. I was already at my desk, halfway through a briefing document for the Chicago call, coffee at my right elbow, the city pale and overcast outside my windows. I watched his name on the screen for 2 rings, then picked up. "How are you going to the Hartwell Gala?" he said. No greeting. Colton had never been good at preamble when he wanted something. "Good morning," I said. "Alexis. Come on. How do you know someone at Hartwell? Because if you have a contact there I really need." "I'm a sponsor," I said. Silence. The particular silence of someone revising their understanding of a situation in real time, which takes longer for some people than others. "A sponsor," he repeated. "Lumen is a presenting sponsor of the gala. We finalized it a few months ago. Lumen." He said the name the way people say words they have heard, but never looked up. "Your company?" "Yes." Another pause. "Okay, but that's a pretty big deal, right? Sponsoring something like that? How much does that even cost?" I looked at the briefing document on my screen. There was a section on Chicago's commercial real estate market I needed to get through before 1 o'clock. "It's a standard sponsorship arrangement," I said. "We work with Hartwell. You work with Hartwell." His voice had shifted now, not quite processing anymore, something closer to recalibrating. "Like as a client?" "I can't discuss client relationships, Colton. You know that, right, he exhaled. I could hear him moving around, the sound of a kitchen, a chair scraping. "Okay, but listen. If you're going to be in the room with David Prescott, can you just, not a big ask, just mention my name? Tell him you have a brother who's been trying to connect. I've been going through James Whitfield for months and I'm getting nowhere. If you could just say something, even just that I exist, that would be." "I heard you the first time," I said. "I said I'd see what I could do. I know, but, Colton." I said his name the way I said things when I needed them to land cleanly. "I have a call in 2 hours that I need to prepare for. I will see you Saturday, a beat." "Okay, yeah." Okay, the recalibration again, the sound of a man deciding not to push. "Hey, and listen. I know we dropped the ball on your birthday. That wasn't great. We'll make it up to you. Mom wants to do the lamb on Sunday." I looked at the painting above my kitchen counter in my mind, the pale gold and gray, the one I had bought because I wanted it. Then I looked at the actual window in front of me, the gray sky over Midtown, the tops of buildings disappearing into low cloud. "Sure," I said. "Sunday sounds fine." We hung up. I went back to the briefing document. The Chicago commercial real estate section was dense but coherent, the kind of material that rewards attention. I gave it attention. I finished the section by 10, moved to the regulatory landscape overview, finished that by 11:15. At noon I ate lunch at my desk. A sandwich from the place on 54th that Thomas had introduced me to, in the fall, turkey and avocado on sourdough, which I ate while reading a client memo that had come in overnight from our Boston office. This is the part of my life that no one in my family had ever been curious about. Not the gala version, not the sponsorship version, not the version where I sat across from David Prescott in London and negotiated contract language for 4 hours. This part, the Tuesday and Thursday and Friday part, the sandwich at the desk part, the briefing document part, the 11-hour day that looked from the outside like nothing, because the outside could not see inside a 31st floor window on 6th Avenue. My mother called that afternoon at 3:47. I was in a meeting and let it go to voicemail. She left a message that I listened to at 4:30. Alexis, honey, just checking in. Colton mentioned you might be able to help him at that event on Saturday. I just want to say, I think it would mean so much to him, and you know how hard he's been working on this. He has a family to support. I know you understand that. Call me when you get a chance. Love you. He has a family to support. I sat with that for a moment. Not with anger. I had moved past the version of myself that got angry at my mother's phrasing, that particular rearrangement of the air that made Colton's needs the gravity everything else orbited. I sat with it the way you sit with something you have known for so long it has stopped surprising you and started simply being true. Then I picked up the phone and called, not my mother but my friend Claudia, who had been my closest friend since we met in an NYU economics seminar at 19, and who was the only person outside of my professional life who knew the full picture of Lumen. Tell me something good, I said when she answered. I just found a 20 in a coat I haven't worn since February, Claudia said. Perfect, how are you? My family wants me to put in a good word for my brother with a client. A pause. The client you just closed the London deal with? Yes. Claudia was quiet for a moment. Then Alexis, I know. Does he know? No, another pause longer. When does he find out? Saturday. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite a sigh, and was exactly what I needed to hear from another human being at that moment. Okay, she said. Okay. Are you all right? I looked at the window. The clouds had lifted slightly over the course of the afternoon, and there was a thin line of pale light along the western horizon, the sun getting low behind the buildings. It happened fast at this time of year. The light here and then gone. The city shifting into its evening register without announcement. Yes, I said. And I meant it. Not in the performed way, not in the way you say it to end a conversation. I meant it in the way of someone who has done the work and knows what they have built and understands that Saturday is not a trap she is setting, but simply a room she is walking into, the same room she walks into every time she walks into any room, carrying the same thing she always carries, which is just the truth of what Lumen is and what she has made it. Good, Claudia said. Wear something good on Saturday. I was going to, I know. I just wanted to say it. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Her sister's new apartment, a restaurant she had been to in the West Village, a book she was reading about the history of salt that she described as surprisingly riveting. I laughed twice, genuinely. By the time we hung up, it was past 5, and the light outside was fully gone, and the city had switched on, all of it at once the way it always did, like someone had made a decision. I stayed at my desk until 7, finished the Chicago prep, reviewed 2 memos from the Boston office, signed off on a vendor contract Sarah had flagged, sent 3 emails that needed to go before morning. Then I shut my laptop, put on my coat, and texted Marcus. In the elevator going down, I thought about what my mother had said on the voicemail. He has a family to support. I thought about what I had. Not a husband, not children, not a house in Darien with a kitchen renovation and a country club membership, and a college friend who could get you a seat at a table in a room where the right people might notice you. What I had was the room itself. I had built it. I owned the table. And on Saturday, for the first time, my family was going to be in it with me. I stepped out onto 6th Avenue. Marcus was already at the curb. The city moved around us, indifferent and enormous, and exactly as I had always understood it. Not a place that gave you anything, but a place that kept precise and honest records of everything you had earned. I got in. The door closed. We pulled into traffic. Friday morning, Renee posted on Instagram. I saw it at 6:54 a.m., which is earlier than I usually look at my phone, but I had woken at 6 with the particular alertness that comes before something significant, the way your body knows things your schedule has not yet confirmed. I was standing at my kitchen window with my first coffee, watching the street below, when the notification appeared. Renee's account was set to public. She had 847 followers, most of them women from Greenwich and Darien and Westport, who posted similar content. Children in monogrammed things, kitchen renovations at various stages, flat lays of seasonal produce arranged on marble. Renee was good at it. She had an eye for the kind of photograph that looked effortless and was not. The post was a photograph of a dinner table set for 8. My mother's dining room, I recognized the chandelier, the specific shade of cream on the walls, the silver candlesticks Diane had received as a wedding gift and brought out for occasions she deemed worthy. The table was full, flowers in the center, the good china, wine already poured. Everyone present, Diane at the head, Colton to her right, Renee beside him, their two children, Harper 7 and Miles 4, seated with the slightly formal posture of children who had been told to behave. Two family friends I recognized from holidays, a cousin who lived in Stamford, 8 people. Every chair filled, the caption read, "Family dinners are everything, so grateful for this crew." 43 likes already. My mother had commented a red heart. Colton had commented, "Best night." A woman named Stacy from their country club had commented, "You all are the cutest." I scrolled through the comments for a moment. My name did not appear anywhere in the photograph or the caption or the tag list. I was not in the photograph because I had not been invited to the dinner, which had apparently taken place on Thursday evening, the evening I had eaten a turkey sandwich at my desk and taken a call from our Boston office at 6 p.m. and left the building at 7 and ridden home in the back of Marcus's car, thinking about the Chicago expansion timeline. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I stood there with my coffee and looked at the painting, the pale gold and gray one, for a while. Here is what I did not do. I did not text Colton. I did not call my mother. I did not post anything in response. Not a photograph of my own apartment, not a comment, not a reaction of any kind. I did not send the screenshot to Claudia with a long message about how it made me feel, though I wanted to, briefly, the way you want to do things that will not help you. What I did was finish my coffee, shower, dress, and go to work. The Friday before the gala was a full day. I had a 9 a.m. call with a client in Seattle whose quarterly numbers had come in soft and who needed help framing the story for their board. I had an 11:30 with my head of research about the Chicago site analysis. I had a lunch with a woman named Patricia Hale, who ran a foundation I had been introduced to through David Prescott's office and who was interested in having Lumen advise on their investment strategy. Lunch was at a restaurant on 57th, where the tables were far enough apart that you could have a real conversation. Patricia Hale was 63 years old with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of direct eye contact that meant she had stopped performing patience for people who wasted her time sometime in her early 40s. I liked her immediately. "David speaks very highly of you," she said after we had ordered. "He said Lumen is the kind of firm that changes how you think about problems. That's what we try to do," I said. "He also said you're younger than he expected. People usually say that," she smiled. "Does it bother you?" I thought about it honestly, which I always tried to do with questions that deserved honesty. "It used to," I said. "Now I think of it as data about who I'm talking to," she laughed. "A real one, short and sudden." "I'm going to enjoy working with you," she said. We talked through the foundation's needs for 90 minutes. By the time the check came, I had a clear picture of the scope, and she had a clear picture of what Lumen could offer. It was a good lunch, the kind that moved something forward without anyone having to push. I was back in the office by 2:30. At 3, my assistant Sarah knocked on my door. "Sorry to interrupt. You have a message from James Whitfield at Hartwell." I looked up. "What kind of message?" He called the main line. "Said he wanted to confirm the guest arrangements for Saturday. He mentioned," she checked her notepad, "that Colton Morgan would be at his table, and asked if there was any chance of a brief introduction to David Prescott during the cocktail hour." I looked at Sarah for a moment. She had worked with me for 2 years and had the professional composure of someone who had learned to read rooms without commenting on what she saw in them. "Tell James Whitfield's office that David Prescott's schedule on Saturday is managed by his own team." I said, "We can't coordinate introductions on his behalf." "Got it," Sarah said. "And Sarah," she paused at the door, "pull up the seating chart for Saturday. I want to confirm table 1 placement one more time." She sent it to my email within 4 minutes. I opened it on my screen. Table 1 was positioned at the front left of the main ballroom, closest to the stage, angled so that anyone standing at the podium would look out and see it first. Lumen Advisory Group, presenting sponsor, 6 seats. My name on the center card. Table 7 was positioned toward the middle right of the room, a good table by ordinary standards, the kind of table you felt fortunate to be invited to. Hartwell Partner Table, courtesy of James Whitfield, 6 seats. Colton Morgan and guest on the right side. The distance between Table 1 and Table 7 was approximately 40 feet and everything else. I closed the seating chart and opened the Chicago file. There was a zoning variance issue in the River North neighborhood that our research team had flagged, and I wanted to understand it fully before Monday's call with our local contacts. I read through the analysis carefully, made 3 margin notes, sent 2 questions back to the research team. At 6 p.m., I shut my laptop. I called Marcus and told him I needed him at 7 the following evening, pick up at the building, destination the plaza, black tie. He said he would have the car ready at 6:50. Then I opened my closet. The dress was already chosen. I had decided 2 weeks ago, before any of this, before the airport and the voicemail and the Instagram post. It was midnight blue, structured at the shoulder, with a cut that was serious rather than decorative. The kind of dress that did not ask for attention but did not apologize for receiving it either. I had worn it once before, to a board dinner in San Francisco, and a woman I did not know had stopped me on the way out to ask who made it. I hung it on the outside of the closet door where I could see it. Then I went to the kitchen, made dinner, pasta, simple, the kind of thing you make when you want to use your hands without thinking too hard, and sat at my table and ate it alone, and did not look at Instagram, and did not call anyone, and did not think, more than once or twice, about the photograph of 8 people around my mother's dinner table with every chair filled. I thought instead about something David Prescott had said at the end of our London meeting. After the contracts were signed and the formal part of the evening was finished, and we were having a drink at the hotel bar, the way you do when something significant has been completed and you want to mark it without making a speech, he had said, "The thing about Lumen is, you always know exactly what you're getting. There's no gap between the presentation and the reality. That's rarer than it should be." I had said thank you and meant it. I thought about that now. No gap between the presentation and the reality. Tomorrow my family was going to walk into a room where there was no gap. Where the presentation and the reality were the same thing, had always been the same thing, had been the same thing for 6 years while no one thought to look. I washed my plate, dried it, put it away. I went to bed at 10:15 and slept without difficulty. The sound sleep of someone who has nothing to hide and nowhere to be until 7 the following evening. Saturday arrived the way important days sometimes do. Quietly, without announcement, the city outside my windows, the same gray-white it had been all week, the light neither dramatic nor particularly kind. I woke at 7:15 without an alarm, made coffee, sat at my kitchen table with the Saturday edition of a newspaper I still had delivered in print because I liked the specific weight of it and the way it forced a different kind of attention than a screen. I read the business section first, as I always did, then the arts, then the first 3 paragraphs of an article about urban planning in Phoenix that I found interesting and then set aside for later. At 9:12, Colton texted, "Hey, quick question. Do you know what time cocktail hour starts tonight?" James said 7, but his assistant said 6:30, and I want to make sure we're there early enough to work the room before dinner. Work the room. I put the phone down on the newspaper and picked up my coffee. At 9:41, a second text from Colton. Also, any chance you could text me when you get there so I can find you? Might be good to be seen together. So people know we're connected. So people know we're connected. I read that one twice. Not because I did not understand it. Because I wanted to hold it fully before I let it go, the way you hold a stone before you set it down somewhere permanent. Colton wanted to be seen with me. He wanted to stand close enough to absorb whatever the room understood about my presence, without knowing what the room understood about my presence, without ever having asked what the room understood about my presence, without once in 6 years showing any curiosity about who I was in any room at all. I typed back, "Cocktail hour is 6:30. I'll see you inside." I set the phone aside and finished the newspaper. The afternoon was mine. I had learned years ago to protect the hours before a significant evening, not from anxiety but from the specific kind of fatigue that comes from filling time you should have left empty. I did not rehearse. I did not strategize. I had not constructed a plan for Saturday evening beyond showing up as exactly what I was and allowing the room to do what rooms do when the truth walks into them. I read for 2 hours, made lunch, took a bath, which I rarely did, but which felt appropriate in the way that small rituals feel appropriate before things that matter. At 3, I sat at my desk and spent 45 minutes reviewing the Chicago zoning memo, not because I needed to, but because the work steadied me, had always steadied me, was the most reliable thing I knew. At 4:15, my phone rang. The name on the screen was not Colton or my mother or Renee. It was David Prescott. I answered, "Alexis." His voice was the same as it was in every meeting, direct, unhurried, the voice of a man who had stopped performing casualness sometime in his 50s and arrived at the genuine article. I wanted to call before tonight, of course, I said. Everything all right? More than all right. A brief pause, the sound of an office behind him. I had a call this morning with the board chair about the advisory rollout. He wants to move the Chicago timeline up by 6 weeks. I told him I'd need to talk to you first. 6 weeks is aggressive, I said, but not impossible. I'd want to look at the resource allocation before I commit. That's what I told him. I said Lumen doesn't commit to timelines they can't hold. He paused again. I also told him I was going to introduce you to him tonight. He'll be at table 1. I looked at the dress on the outside of my closet door. Midnight blue, structured, serious. I'll be ready, I said. I know you will. Another pause, shorter. Patricia Hale called me this morning too. Said lunch on Friday was one of the better conversations she's had in a year. She's impressive, I said. I think we can do good work together. Good. The warmth in his voice was genuine, not the warmth of a client performing satisfaction, but the warmth of someone who had learned to recognize quality and found it worth acknowledging. I'll find you during cocktails. We hung up. I sat at my desk for a moment. Outside, the afternoon light had shifted slightly, a pale winter sun finding a gap in the clouds and coming through at a low angle across my floor. It lasted about 40 seconds, then the clouds closed again and the light returned to its flat Saturday gray. I went to my desk drawer and took out a card. Creamstock, my name embossed at the top in a font I had chosen carefully 8 years ago, because it was legible without being heavy, because it looked like something that would last. Below my name, founder and CEO, Lumen Advisory Group. Below that, the Midtown address and my direct line. I had carried these cards for 8 years. I had handed them to people in conference rooms and hotel lobbies and airports, and at dinners that ran past midnight, and on the sidewalk outside of buildings where something significant had just been decided. I had handed them to senators and surgeons and the kind of investor whose last name you recognize from buildings. I had handed them in moments of introduction and moments of conclusion, and moments that were both at once. I put 3 cards in the small evening bag I would carry tonight, the same number I always carried, not more, not fewer. At 5:30 I started getting ready. The dress went on first, then the shoes, black, low-heeled, because I would be standing for 3 hours and I had learned the lesson about heels at events where you could not sit down. Hair up, the way I wore it when I needed my face to be fully visible. Earrings that were small and precise, platinum, a gift I had bought myself after Lumen's first $1 million contract, which I had closed on a Tuesday, and celebrated alone in my apartment with a glass of wine and a phone call to Claudia. I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom for 30 seconds. Not longer than that. Vanity had never been the point. The point was legibility, the same thing it had always been, the same thing the name lumen meant, from the Latin word for the light that actually reaches the surface. I looked like what I was. That was all I had ever needed to look like. At 6:48, Marcus texted. Downstairs, I picked up my bag, turned off the bedroom light, walked through my apartment, the kitchen with the painting, the study with the desk too large for any reasonable person, the living room with the south-facing windows, and did not look at any of it with particular sentiment, because it would all be here when I got back, and because sentiment before the moment tends to spend the thing you need to save for after. In the elevator, I checked my phone one last time. A text from Claudia, go get him, call me after, a calendar reminder for a Sunday 9 a.m. that I dismissed. Nothing from my family, the lobby, the door, the cold night air, sharp and clean. Marcus stood at the car with the door already open, the way he always did. He looked at me, one brief, professional assessment, and gave a single nod. Not complimentary, not performative. The nod of a man who recognized that something was about to happen and found the recognition sufficient. I got in, the door closed. We pulled away from the curb on East 74th Street and merged into Saturday evening traffic heading west toward 5th Avenue, toward Central Park South, toward the Plaza Hotel, where 300 people were arriving, right now in black cars and taxis, where the ballroom was lit and the tables were set and the name cards were in their places, where my brother was walking through the door at this exact moment, or would be soon, with his wife beside him and his college friend's name in his pocket, and no idea, not the faintest idea, of what the room already knew. I simply went. That was all. That was the whole of it. No plan, no speech prepared, no moment engineered or timed or arranged, just the truth of what Lumen was, walking through the door of a room where the truth had been waiting. The Plaza Hotel on a Saturday evening in March looks the way very few things look anymore. Genuinely, unself-consciously grand, not grand in the way of things that are trying to remind you of their importance. Grand in the way of a building that has housed enough history to have stopped thinking about it. The limestone facade lit from below, the fountain at the entrance still in the cold, the red carpet running from the curb to the doors, worn smooth in the center, from decades of people who had somewhere important to be. Marcus pulled up at 6:58. A doorman opened my door before I had reached for the handle. I stepped out into the cold air, the kind of cold that is bracingly clean after the warmth of a car, and stood for a moment on the curb while Marcus pulled away. The entrance was busy, couples arriving, a group of 4 men in tuxedos coming from a cab, a woman in a green gown pausing to adjust something near the door. The sound of it all was layered and specific. Heels on stone, low voices, the distant sound of music from inside. I went in, the cocktail hour was in the grand ballroom's anteroom, a space with ceilings high enough to make most rooms feel honest about their own smallness. Chandeliers, cream walls with gilded moldings. Long tables along the perimeter, with champagne and wine, and small plates of things arranged with the precision of a catering team that had done this 800 times and intended to do it 800 more. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and moved into the room. Sarah had confirmed the numbers that morning. 287 confirmed attendees, 14 tables in the main ballroom. Cocktail hour, running 6:30 to 7:45, before the formal program began. I had been to enough of these to know how they worked. The first 30 minutes pure arrival and orientation, the middle 30 minutes where the real conversations happened, the last 15 minutes of gravitational pull toward the ballroom doors. It was 7:03. I was in the middle 30. I saw David Prescott before he saw me. He was across the room near the windows, deep in conversation with 2 men I recognized from the Hartwell board materials. One was the CFFO, one was the board chair David had mentioned on the phone, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had built 3 companies before he was 50 and spent the last decade giving the money away in ways that were apparently more complicated than they sounded. David caught my eye across the room. He said something brief to the men he was with and moved toward me, hand extended, the particular smile of someone who is genuinely glad to see the person they are looking at. Alexis. He shook my hand with both of his, which he did with people he meant it with. You look well, thank you. So do you. I want you to meet Gerald before we sit down. He turned, and Gerald Fitch was already beside him because David Prescott was the kind of man whose intentions propagated through a room before he moved through it himself. Gerald was 71, compact and alert, with the handshake of a man who had decided decades ago that how you shook hands said something worth saying. Gerald, this is Alexis Morgan. Lumen Advisory Group. Gerald Fitch looked at me with the focused attention of someone who did not attend events in order to be at them. Lumen, he said. David's told me about your work. I hope some of it was good, I said. He smiled. Most of it was specific, which I prefer to good. He held my gaze. I understand you closed the London agreement this week. We did. David said it was the most thorough strategic framework he'd seen from an external firm. In 30 years, I did not deflect this or minimize it the way I might have done 10 years ago, when I still had the habit of making myself smaller, in rooms where I had not yet decided I belonged. We worked hard on it, I said. The team did exceptional work. I'd like to talk about the Chicago timeline before we sit down, Gerald said. David mentioned you have concerns about the 6-week compression. I have questions, I said. Concerns I can address after I have answers. Gerald Fitch looked at me for a moment with something that was not quite amusement and not quite assessment, and was in fact a combination of both that I recognized as the look of someone deciding they like how another person operates. Fair, he said. Let's find a corner. We talked for 12 minutes. Gerald was precise and listened without interrupting, and asked 2 questions that were better than most questions I got asked. And by the end of it, we had a framework for the timeline adjustment that I could take back to my team Monday morning. David stood slightly to the side and let it happen, which was exactly the right thing to do, and which I noted with appreciation. At 7:18, I excused myself to refresh my drink. I was standing at the champagne table when I heard my name, not called out, spoken at a normal volume, maybe 8 feet to my left, by a voice I recognized. Told you she'd be here. I just need like 2 minutes with Prescott, and if Alexis can just, Colton. I turned. He was standing with Renee and James Whitfield. all three of them with drinks in hand, positioned near the edge of the room with a slightly angled posture of people who are watching the room rather than participating in it. Colton was in a tuxedo that fit well. He had always dressed carefully, had always understood the surface of things. Renee was in a gown the color of old champagne, her hair up, a thin gold necklace at her throat. James Whitfield was the one I had seen in the Hartwell directory. Mid-40s, heavier than his headshot, with the careful sociability of someone in brand partnerships who attended events like this as a professional obligation rather than a pleasure. Colton saw me at the same moment I turned. His face did something complicated. Relief first, the relief of someone who has been looking for a familiar thing in an unfamiliar room. Then something else, something slower, as he took in where I was standing and who I had been standing near and the particular quality of ease with which I was standing there. He came toward me. Renee followed. Alexis. He leaned in, kissed my cheek the way he did at family events. The social kiss, practiced and light. You look great. How long have you been here? About 20 minutes. We just got here. He glanced back toward where David Prescott was now speaking with Patricia Hale, who had arrived sometime in the last 10 minutes and whom I had waved to from across the room. Have you seen Prescott? Have you talked to him? Yes, I said. Colton's eyes sharpened. You talked to him? What did he say? Did you mention, Colton? Renee put a hand on his arm, the practiced touch of a wife who had learned exactly when to interrupt. She smiled at me, the smile she used at family events, warm and slightly careful. Happy belated birthday, Alexis. You really do look beautiful, thank you. Renee, we're sorry about your birthday, she said. It got away from us. The kids had a thing. It's fine, I said. James Whitfield had arrived at Colton's shoulder. He introduced himself to me with the slightly elevated energy of someone who had been told I might be useful. I shook his hand and said his name back to him and watched him register that I already knew it. I hear Lumen does great work, he said. Thank you. I said. Are you? He stopped. Looked at something over my shoulder, and his expression changed in the small but legible way that expressions change when a room rearranges itself around a person walking through it. Is that David Prescott coming over here? I did not turn around, because I did not need to. I heard David's voice behind my left shoulder. Alexis. Gerald wants to loop in Thomas before the formal program. Do you think he could be available Monday at 8? I turned. David was there. Gerald Fitch just behind him, both of them with the purposeful ease of men in the middle of something. Monday at 8 works, I said. I'll have Sarah confirm. David nodded. Then he looked at the group I was standing with. Colton, Renee, James, with the polite attention of a man encountering people at the periphery of a conversation he had come to continue. Sorry, I said. David, this is my brother Colton Morgan, and his wife Renee. The room did what rooms do in the moment before something changes. It held itself very still. David Prescott looked at Colton, then back at me, then at Colton again. Colton Morgan. He said slowly, You're Alexis's brother. It was not a question. Colton smiled. The broad, ready smile he used in professional settings, the one that had opened door his entire life because he was handsome and confident, and had learned early that a certain kind of smile worked as currency. That's right, he said, and extended his hand. It's great to finally, James, David said, not unkindly, but with the precision of a man who was good at managing rooms. He looked at James Whitfield. You didn't mention Colton was Alexis's brother when you arranged the table. James's smile became careful. No, I didn't think to. Why didn't you say so from the start? David looked at Colton again. And there was something in his expression that was not unkind but was entirely clear. The expression of a man who had just understood the geometry of a situation and was adjusting accordingly. I've been trying to get in front of Alexis for 4 months before she finally agreed to the London meeting. If I'd known you were her brother, I might have had a different approach. The air around us changed. Colton's smile stayed on his face for a moment longer than it should have. The way a light stays on for a half-second after you flip the switch. Renee went very still beside him. David turned back to me. Monday at 8. Gerald, I'll have my assistant send the dial in. Then, to the group, the warm dismissal of a man with somewhere to be. Enjoy the evening. He moved away. Gerald Fitch followed with a brief nod to me that contained more than a nod usually contains. And then it was just the 4 of us, Colton and Renee and James Whitfield and me, standing in a corner of a cocktail party at the plaza while the room continued around us, entirely unaware. Colton looked at me, his mouth opened, closed. I picked up my champagne glass and took a sip, unhurried. Your table is 7, I said. Center right of the ballroom. The salmon is supposed to be good tonight. I smiled at Renee. I nodded at James, then I turned and walked back toward table 1. The formal program began at 7:50 with a welcome from the Hartwell Foundation's executive director, a woman named Claire Odom, who had the practiced warmth of someone who had given this speech many times and still meant it. I was seated at table 1 between Gerald Fitch and a woman named Sophia Renard, who ran a private equity firm I had crossed paths with twice in the last 3 years and whom I had wanted to speak with at length for almost as long. To Gerald's left was David Prescott. Across the table, 3 other Hartwell board members and the head of their legal division. A man named Arthur who had been in the London meeting and who acknowledged me with the comfortable nod of someone I had already established a working relationship with. It was a good table, not because of its position in the room, though the position was good. Because of the quality of the conversation, which moved between the Chicago timeline and Sophia's recent work in healthcare, infrastructure, and a genuinely interesting disagreement between Gerald and Arthur about regulatory appetite in the current environment that I found myself drawn into, and which lasted through the first course and into the second. I was present at that table in the way I was always present when the work was real, and the people were serious, completely, without the divided attention that social events usually required. I ate the salmon, which was as good as advertised. I drank 1 glass of wine and switched to water after, because I wanted to be sharp through the end of the evening. I laughed twice at things that were genuinely funny. I did not look at table 7, not out of avoidance. Out of the simple fact that table 7 was not where anything that mattered to me was happening, the program moved through its formal elements. The foundation overview, the grant announcements, a brief video about a children's literacy initiative Hartwell had funded in 3 cities. David spoke for 7 minutes about the company's commitment to the communities they operated in, which was the kind of speech that sounds like a corporate formality until you have sat across from the man who wrote it and understood that he meant each sentence individually. Gerald leaned over during the applause after David's remarks. The Chicago conversation this morning was good, he said, low enough for just me to hear. I want to expand the scope of what we discussed, not tonight, but soon I'd welcome that, I said. He nodded once, the nod of a man who had said what he meant and needed no confirmation beyond the one I had given. At 9:07, between the main course and dessert, the tables began the informal reshuffling that always happened at events like this. People standing, moving to other tables for brief conversations, the room becoming fluid in the way it did once the formal program had created enough shared context for real exchange. I was speaking with Sophia Renard about a firm she had worked with in Boston when I became aware, without turning, that someone was standing at the edge of table 1. I knew who it was before I turned, the particular stillness of a person who has arrived somewhere and is not sure they should have. I turned. Colton was standing 2 feet from the table, alone. Renee was not with him. James Whitfield was not with him. He was standing the way people stand when they have crossed a room with a purpose and arrived to find the purpose harder to execute than they had imagined. He looked at me, then at Gerald Fitch beside me, then at David Prescott across the table, who had glanced up from his conversation at the movement. Sorry to interrupt, Colton said. His voice was careful, the voice he used when he was managing himself. Alexis, can I? Do you have a minute? Sophia had paused our conversation with the gracious attention of someone who understood what kind of moment this was, even without context. Of course, I said. I excused myself and stood and followed Colton 6 feet from the table, to a space beside one of the tall floral arrangements that lined the perimeter of the ballroom. Close enough to table 1 that it was visible. Far enough for a private conversation. Colton looked at me for a moment before he spoke. In the ballroom light, he looked the way he had looked since I could remember. Handsome, assured, the effortless surface of a man who had never had to construct himself from the outside in. But there was something underneath it tonight that I had not seen before, or had seen but not acknowledged, or had acknowledged and set aside because it had not mattered until now. He looked uncertain. How long, he said. How long what? Lumen. How long has it been? He stopped. Started again. David Prescott knew your name. Gerald Fitch knew your name. The woman you were sitting next to knew your name. These are people I have been trying to get in front of for months, and they all knew your name. I did not answer immediately. I let the question stand. 6 years, I said. He absorbed that. I watched him do it, the actual work of absorbing it, which was different from just hearing it, The company is 6 years old? I started it 4 days after my 26th birthday, I said, in a sublease office in Midtown, and it. He stopped again. The careful management in his voice was slipping now, not into anger, but into something less controlled than he was used to. David said he'd been trying to get a meeting with you for 4 months. That's right. And you? His jaw worked slightly. You signed a contract with Hartwell. I can't discuss client relationships. Alexis, he said my name the way he had not said it since we were children, without the social layer on it, without the particular performance of a brother who had long ago decided what kind of sister I was and stopped looking for evidence to the contrary. He said it plain. I've been trying to get into this room for 6 months, into this company. I've been emailing James Whitfield. I've been going to his networking things. I've had Renee reach out to his wife. I know, I said. And you? He looked at table 1. David Prescott was now speaking with Gerald Fitch. The easy conversation of two men who had worked together long enough to have shorthand. He looked back at me. You're their presenting sponsor. Yes, why didn't you tell anyone? And there it was. The question I had been waiting for, the one I had thought about in the back of Marcus's car and at my kitchen table and standing at the window of my office looking out at 6th Avenue. The question that was the right question. The only question that mattered, and that had been available to him for 6 years and had not been asked until now. I looked at my brother. You never asked, I said. The words were not an accusation. They were just true, the way facts are true. Without heat, without drama, without the need to be anything more than what they were. Colton's face did the thing it had done in the cocktail hour, the thing where the surface stayed arranged while something underneath it moved. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes, which were the same gray-green as mine, which we had both inherited from a father who left when I was 11, went through something I did not have a word for. I didn't know to ask, he said, and his voice, for the first time in conversation, was not managed. It was just his voice. No, I said, you didn't. We stood there for a moment in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel while 300 people moved around us. And the string quartet in the corner shifted from one piece to another, and the chandeliers held everything in their steady, indiscriminate light. Then Renee appeared at Colton's shoulder. She had come from the direction of table 7. Moving through the room with the focused intention of a woman who had seen something from a distance and come to manage it. She looked at Colton's face first, the practiced red of a wife who monitored her husband's emotional weather, and then at mine. Her face had the particular quality of someone who had just understood something they wished they had understood differently. Alexis, she said. Her voice was careful. We had no idea. I know, I said. The Instagram post, she said. Last night didn't. Renee, I said her name the same way I had said Colton's, without heat. It's fine, it was not entirely fine. We all knew it was not entirely fine. But it was the true version of fine, the one that means, I have put this in its correct place, and I am not going to let it take more space than it deserves. At that moment, from across the room, David Prescott caught my eye. He was standing now, moving toward the stage for what I understood was the final portion of the evening's program. He gave me the brief nod of a man who needed me back at the table. I turned to Colton. I have to go back, I said. He nodded. He did not say anything else. There was nothing else to say. Not tonight, not in this room, and I think he understood that. I turned and walked back to table 1. Behind me, I heard Renee say something to Colton in a low voice. I did not catch the words. I did not need to. I sat down. Sophia Renard picked up our conversation exactly where we had left it, with the smooth continuity of a professional who treated interruptions as weather rather than events. Gerald Fitch leaned slightly toward me as I settled in my chair. He did not look at me, he was watching David at the stage, but he said quietly, "Everything all right?" "Yes," I said. He nodded once, satisfied, and did not ask again. At 9:47, David Prescott returned to the stage for his closing remarks. He thanked the sponsors by name, the Hartwell Foundation. The 3 supporting sponsors, and, first among the presenting sponsors, Lumen Advisory Group, and their founder, Alexis Morgan, without whom this evening and a great deal else would not have been possible. 300 people applauded. I did not look at table 7, but I heard, in the general movement of the room, a particular stillness in one part of it. The held-breath stillness of people who have just heard a name they recognize spoken in a context they did not expect. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. The applause continued. I set the glass down, and the evening moved forward, and I let it. 8 months after the Hartwell Foundation Gala, I stood in a conference room on the 34th floor of a building on Wacker Drive in Chicago and looked out at the city below. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of cold that Chicago does differently from New York, more direct, less negotiable, the wind off the lake arriving with the conviction of something that has traveled a long way and intends to be felt. The room was ours, Lumen's fifth office, the one we had spent 14 months planning and 6 weeks fitting out, had opened on the 1st of October. 12 people on the ground team so far, with 4 more starting in January. A client list that had expanded faster than I had projected, which was unusual because I projected carefully. I had a coffee in my hand. The same kind I always had, black, from the place 2 blocks from the building that Thomas had found during the site visits and declared mandatory. I had been in Chicago 3 days for the opening sprint and was flying back to New York that evening. I stood at the window and looked at the city. I did not think in that moment about the Hartwell Gala. I thought about the zoning variance in River North that we had resolved in June, and the regulatory meeting in August, and the particular Thursday afternoon in September when the last piece of the Chicago framework had clicked into place. And I had sat in the Midtown office and understood, with the quiet certainty that comes only after real work, that it was going to be good. But since you have stayed with me this long, I want to tell you what happened after. David Prescott called on the Monday after the gala, as we had arranged. Gerald Fitch joined the call. We resolved the Chicago timeline in 40 minutes and expanded the scope of the engagement in the remaining 20. The final agreement, signed 6 weeks later, was $41 million over 4 years. The largest contract in Lumen's history by a significant margin. Patricia Hale retained Lumen 3 weeks after our Friday lunch. Her foundation's investment strategy is now something I am genuinely proud of, in the way I am proud only of work that does what it is supposed to do. Sophia Renard called the Tuesday after the gala. We had lunch the following week. There is a collaboration in the early stages that I will not describe yet because I do not talk about things until they are real, but which I am optimistic about in the specific, evidence-based way. I am optimistic about things that have been built carefully. Colton did not get the position at Hartwell Industries. David Prescott did not blacklist him, did not call James Whitfield, did not do anything that could be described as interference. What happened was simpler, and in some ways more final than interference. David Prescott was a thorough man who made decisions based on complete information. And the complete information about Colton Morgan was that he was a man who had spent 6 months trying to enter a room through a side door, without knowing who held the key to the front one. That was not a disqualifying fact on its own. But it was a fact. And David noticed facts. Colton sent me a text 3 weeks after the gala. Heard back from Hartwell. They went in a different direction. Appreciate you trying. I had not tried. I had simply been what I was. I wrote back, I'm sorry it didn't work out. Hope something good comes along. I meant it. That is the part that surprises people when I tell this story, or maybe it does not surprise people who have been paying attention. I meant it genuinely. I did not want my brother to fail. I had never wanted my brother to fail. I had wanted, for most of my life, only for my brother to look up long enough to see what was in front of him. The failure was not a victory. It was just a consequence. The natural consequence of a man who had spent years treating the world as a series of surfaces without wondering what was underneath any of them. Renee deleted the Thursday dinner post from Instagram in the week after the gala. I noticed because I happened to look, not because I was checking. She posted nothing about it. She never mentioned it to me directly. My mother called 4 times in the 10 days after the gala. The first call came on the Sunday morning afterward, while I was eating breakfast and reading the paper, and I looked at her name on the screen and thought about the voicemail she had left. He has a family to support, and let it ring through. The second and third calls I also did not answer, not with anger, not with strategy, but with the simple understanding that I did not yet have the version of myself available that could have that conversation without either performing something or saying something that could not be taken back. The fourth call I answered. It was a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the gala. I was at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and a contract I was reviewing. Alexis? Her voice had lost the bright prepared quality it usually had. It sounded older, not frail. My mother was not frail, but closer to something real. I owe you an apology. I put down the contract. I don't think I ever asked, she said. About your work, what you'd built. I don't think I ever. She stopped. I didn't know. And I should have known. I should have asked. I sat with that for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. The painting above the counter caught the lamplight the same way it always did. The pale gold going warm, the gray going soft. Thank you for saying that, I said. Are you all right? Yes, I said. I am. We talked for 22 minutes. Not about the gala, not about Colton, not about the airport on my birthday, or the Instagram post, or the voicemail about who had a family to support. We talked about other things, a trip my mother was considering to see an old friend in Savannah, a book I was reading, the weather in New York versus the weather in Greenwich. Small things, ordinary things, the kind that hold a relationship in place while the larger things are still being understood. It was the best conversation I had had with my mother in several years. I do not know what comes next with my family. I want to be honest about that because I think honesty matters more than resolution, especially in stories like this one where the ending is not a door closing, but a door remaining open. Not all the way. Not yet. Maybe not ever all the way, but open. What I know is this. I know that I built something real. I know it took 6 years and a sublease office that smelled like old carpet and 2 years of difficult that do not make for a good dinner party story, and a team of 22 people who came to work every morning and made it what it is. I know that I built it quietly, not because I was hiding it, but because I had learned early that the people who needed to know would find out, and the people who didn't were not the point. I know that I stood at a curb at JFK Airport on the morning of my 32nd birthday with a suitcase and a silent phone and a cup of coffee that was waiting for me in a car driven by a man who showed up every single time I needed him to. And I know that the loneliness of that morning was real, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because pretending otherwise would be a lie, and this whole story has been about what happens when the truth is finally allowed to be the size it actually is. I know that being overlooked is not the same as being small. I know that silence is not the same as absence. I know that the light that actually reaches the surface is the only light that counts, and that the work of getting it there is almost never visible from the outside. And that this is not a tragedy, but simply the condition of building anything real. And I know that on a Tuesday in November, standing in a conference room on the 34th floor of a building in Chicago, with a coffee in my hand and a city spread out below me that did not know my name yet but was about to, I was more certain of who I was than I had ever been in a house in Greenwich with fresh flowers in the entryway and a seat across the table from where the light came in best. I picked up my phone and texted Marcus, same time Thursday, JFK, not Midtown. He wrote back in 30 seconds. Already on the calendar, I put the phone in my pocket, finished the coffee, looked at Chicago one more time, the lake, the grid of streets, the late November sky going gray at the edges the way skies do when they mean it. Then I picked up my bag and went back to work. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be recognized by the people who were supposed to see them first. I understand that waiting. I lived inside it for a long time. But here is what I learned, slowly, and then all at once, in the way you learn the things that matter. The recognition that changes your life almost never comes from the people you were waiting for. It comes from the room you built, the work you did, the morning you decided to stop making yourself smaller so that someone else would not have to adjust their eyes. You do not need their permission to be what you already are. If this story found you at a moment when you are waiting to be seen, leave me a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories like this one. Stories about the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who were building something the whole time nobody was looking. I'll see you in the next one.